in the beginning, I would also like to wish each other for International Women's Day. And I welcome all our guests, audience, and our renowned panelists in this ThinkLab series program on National Education Policy 2020. We have a very renowned, panel of speakers today. We have with us Madam Shanta Maria, who is joining us from Hyderabad. She is a retired professor from Hyderabad University. She received highest civilian honor Padma Shri in 1998. She's also a Magsaysay Award winner, and she was also awarded Hyderabad Women of the Decade Achievers Award. She's very renowned child rights activist, founder of MB Foundation, and she has worked closely on right to education policy, which was one of the most landmark policies of UPA. We also have with us Dr. Latika Gupta from Department of Education, University of Delhi. She has been a very vocal and very strong, voice in education, in academia. She has worked on various national and international bodies, including NCERT and UNESCO. And currently, she is working as an assistant professor in Department of Education, and she has written a lot about women's and gender and education. So third panelist is Dr. Richa Sharma from Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. She has done her PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University. She has taught in many prominent universities of the country like Delhi University, Jamia Millia Islamia, and currently she is working in Tata Institute of Social Sciences. And we have with us Mr. Devasahayam. He is our Tamilnadu state head for academia vertical, and he has worked as assistant professor in Loyola College in Chennai. I welcome all the panelists for this program, and I would like to begin our discussion on National Education Policy 2020, which was approved on 29th of July 2020, and Karnataka was the first state to implement it in August 2021. Since its inception, the policy has drawn a lot of attention of scholars, of politicians, of child rights activists, and and a lot of people who work as practitioners of education, different stakeholders, think tanks, and other units also in education. It has drawn attention, not only on the grounds that it after many years a new policy have been introduced, it was introduced in 2020, but basically there was a lot of controversial issues which came up, starting with the way policy was brought in. It wasn't passed from the Parliament of India. It was only approved by cabinet, and it was implemented in haste. That was the biggest criticism, which drew attention of masses and academia. And it also created a lot of ripple in the terrain and in the broader landscape of education, that in the haste, a lot of discussions which were needed amongst the stakeholders were not precisely followed by the current dispensation. And at the same time, a lot of criticism has also been, received about, certain controversial things such as cultural hegemony, the way policy works or intends to work, for the country, which is full of diversity and pluralism. There is also, there are also issues which are related to the way policy has been, implemented in certain states, where which are resource crunched, which has a lot of diversity, and which also which also want to make breakthroughs through their own ways and methods in terms of addressing the contextual needs of states for primary, secondary, and higher education. So I would first invite our first panelist, Shanta Sinha ma'am, to kind of help us to understand how educational policy, is relevant today. Why there should be an education policy, which which basically, becomes relevant in terms of a guiding document, as a document, which advises us more on how education should be, in our country. So I request ma'am to please take this discussion ahead, by first of all, laying down this understanding in for all of us, that why, a policy should only be, I mean, which is only a guiding document, should only act as an advisory framework, but must not become a structure or a framework which imposes, one particular kind of system or one particular kind of understanding on the entire country. Shanta ma'am.
Thank you. I must first of all thank All India Professionals Congress for raising this debate on education and the new education policy. And thanks, Kanchan, thanks, Maria, for this opportunity. And I must say that the recent headlines about how the union government threatened to, in fact, stop funding to the Tamilnadu government under the Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan if it did not implement the three-language formula is indicative of the kind of authoritarian regime that we are under. Now, the education minister justified it by saying it is part of the new national education policy and that the Tamil Nadu government is duty bound to implement it, or else it will not send any money from the union government. This is a very dangerous trend, and it has to be, in fact, condemned by all citizens as well as states in the country. It violates many principles of democracy, federalism, and which we will all discuss today. First of all, I must say that the new education policy has no local standard. Just as how Kanchan has just said, that it was not discussed in the state governments. It was not discussed in the parliament. If you know, when we discussed the national education earlier, they were discussed in all state governments. They were discussed in the parliament, and then it got approved as an education policy. Nothing of this sort happened. All that it happened was there was a cabinet approval to this. In fact, there is a central board, advisory board of education, which is the place where all state ministers and state secretaries are concerned with education come together. Plus, there are educationists, which was held very regularly under earlier regimes. And we find that after this government had come power, they have not even convened a CAVE. This new education policy should have been placed before the CAVE and discussed. In fact, we find that the CAVE committee has become redundant by not holding meetings. So, in a way, by not following procedures, what is this policy about? What is its locus standi? I think we will have to really interrogate what NEP's locus standi is about. Secondly, we all know that under the Constitution of India, the 42nd Amendment, education has come into the concurrent list. Before it was state list, but I will not go into the history on why it became the concurrent list. That is when the center and state had equal decision-making powers. But the center cannot dictate to the state governments or bypass them because it is under the concurrent list. In fact, if you see, no school curriculum can be designed at the center and made mandatory across the country. Nothing can be done without consent of the. So we will have to question this even under the constitutional provisions, where the state has an equal say over all the plans and policies that are made in the center. So in a sense, it violates the federal principle, which again Kanchan was mentioning. We know India is a union of states. State governments are better placed to know how education and in their respective states. That uh, each state has its own institutional framework, its own political history, its own cultural history, its own strengths and weaknesses, and it is best to have a state policy for education. And one does not deny the importance of national education policy, but that is, as again considered, guidelines, broad guidelines, but the details are to be worked out by the state government. And even in any case, if they had introduced, say, for example, many uh, recommendations to the NEP, like for example, which is quite welcome, that 3 to 18 years should be one continuous stream, which I think all of us have welcomed, that you must have a continuity in education. But then they had not looked at how you can make it a part of the law. You know, when there is a policy and there's already a right to education act 6 to 14, what would the recommendation be? The recommendation would be that why don't you extend the right from 14 to 18 years and also from 3 to 6 years. But nothing of that sort was done. And there was a total revamping of the education system, which is 3 years plus 3 years plus 5 years plus 4 years, without any consultation of the state governments and their own location and administrative framework. You know, to pass something like that and overall the entire education system without consultation, without even looking at the strengths of the system, I think it's totally unproductive. So, in a sense, that it is a NEP, I would say, has no local standard. It violates the federal principle. It violates the constitutional principle. In fact, I would go into the next step. It violates the right to education under many provisions. You know, which is very important when there is a law, and it is a fundamental right of children for free compulsory education, fundamental right that was enacted in 2009, and it was a product of some 10 years of deliberations. It wasn't like an NEP that came overnight. You know, even when it was passed, it went to the parliamentary standing committee. States were asked to give responses. There were at least some 20,000 responses. And I remember how Anita Kaul, who was a joint secretary, and how Vinod Raina, who was from the civil society, and all of us who were outside, given the inputs. You know, it was a huge exercise of giving inputs to what the Right to Education Act must have. And that is a fundamental right. It clearly spells out the state obligation for children, and that it is a right for which, if it is violated, it is the state that is violating the children's right to education, and that they will have to be obliged to fulfill the obligation. So, in a way, if I were drafting the national education policy, I would look at every article in the Right to Education Act to see why was it not implemented, not suggest ideas contrary to a fundamental right. It is a fundamental right. So if you are discussing NEP 2020, you will certainly critique the ways in which the implementation has occurred or not occurred. Nothing of that sort happened. As if the Right to Education Act did not exist at all. There is no mention of the Right to Education Act. So you find that the education policy, there's no locus standi, is given more weight than a right to education, which is a fundamental right. So in a way, I think that itself is a huge what does one say, uh, uh, gap. And in fact, one could go to the court for every sentence that it has provided for in violation of the Right to Education Act. To give you an example, it really talks about commodification of education and privatization at every stage of education. And in fact, encouraging private players in terms of private-public partnership. Now, the question is, while the Right to Education Act did not, one would say, nationalize education, where it banned privatization, it certainly gave a responsibility to the private schools to reserve 25% of the seat to the underprivileged children under Article 12C. So if you were in the NEP, you will find out why it was not done and have a policy to see that 25% of reservation actually gets done and have a deliberation with all state governments to find out how we put our minds together to see that there is a compliance of that provision. Instead, it is completely done away and in fact doesn't even think it was wrong to have for-profit educational institutes. And we know privatization and commodification of education is essentially exclusion. It is not inclusive at all. But that doesn't seem to be the considered at all. The other thing that it shows a lot of concern for learning crisis. You must have seen that that learning crisis is a running theme even in Asst report that we see that children are not learning. But one would like to look at it not as learning crisis, but crisis in the education system. The systemic crisis, and the systemic crisis comes out of not abiding to the Right to Education Act. And there has not been any way where you could link the issue of learning to the issue of equity in education. Even under the government system, you have inequitable distribution of education. At one end of the spectrum, you have the Kendriya Vidyalayas with well-endowed schools and teachers and labs, playground. And on the other hand of the spectrum, you have schools without boundaries. You have children without teachers. You have schools where there are teachers and no children. It's so iniquitous. And the Right to Education Act, in fact, has in its Schedule A mentioned define what a school is. And if that school, and the reason why it didn't go into defining what quality of education is, but in terms of supplies, it felt that if you had equitable infrastructure, number of teachers in proportion to the children, and if all these were present, then the government is sending a message that they are, in fact, determined to see that children enjoy their right to education. In fact, if there were sufficient number of teachers and infrastructure and all facilities under Schedule A, clearly indicates that the government is going to spend at least 7 or 8% of its budget on right education, clearly giving a message that we want equity in education, clearly giving a message that children must learn. So it is a crisis in the education system where that kind of allocation was never done by repeated governments. In spite of the Right to Education Act, this compliance was never there. And in the recent report that I just did on NEP 2023 to 24, they show how more number of teachers were in upper primary school, secondary school, and higher secondary school when compared to children in the primary school. Whereas there are more number of children in primary schools. So there has to be rethinking on the supplies. The NAP thinks that the supply and input generated uh, thing we have to move out of and talk only about learning outcomes. So this dichotomization of learning outcomes as if it was different from the supply is actually a peril to people learning. All of us know who have been in education that there is a link between equity, justice, and education. And the goal of education is equity, is democracy, is justice. It cannot be taken away and just assess some children in terms of whether they've done maths well or language well. In fact, the best, I would think the best way in which you can judge whether there is, how do you assess a good school? How do you, I think it can be judged on the basis of their inclusivity.
Shanta, ma'am, I'll quickly stop you here, and from here we would like to just go to Latika, Dr. Latika Gupta, and where you leave that right to education is sidelined, somewhere through the policy,
Right.
the new policy, it is
Sure.
sidelined. My question to Dr. Latika Gupta would be, firstly, I want you to explain to our audience that after 5 years of in its inception, what are the gaps? Do you think that policy, whatever design, whatever imagination this policy had, has it been has it been able to achieve those goals and those aims which it had kept for itself? Number one. Number two, what Shanta ma'am has presented, the dichotomy, the dichotomy is kind of evident in at all the levels, in primary education, in secondary education, in higher education. So we see that on the ground the reality is very different, the concerns and the issues are very different. They don't work in terms of the statement of intent which this policy has presented for the country. So can you just enlighten us more about the gaps which we see, the disruptions which this policy has created? We want more of your insights on these issues, ma'am. You're muted.
Thank you, Dr. Kanchan, and thanks a lot, All India Professional Congress, for giving us the opportunity. And I must say that the subject is very vast and too many problems, challenges, issues that one can talk about in the NEP 2020. And the biggest challenge is that it reads like a document that that's like a science fantasy. There is this trend these days that we watch a very technically produced film. This young generation watches such films which take us back 400 years, 1,000 years, 5,000 years in some kind of past. So this policy is like move forward by going back to the past, an imaginary, unscientific, unknown past, and then create a feeling of togetherness. And this is where my first point that I want to present to you is that it's a policy which doesn't really aim at reform. It cannot reform. It's a reductionist policy. Imagine for primary school children or for school children, it aims at largely imparting children with foundational skills of literacy, numeracy, and other competencies. Really? Will that be our goal? Literacy and numeracy? I mean, basic numeracy, all the cart pullers, all the thelawalas, and even businessmen know without really going to school. So, a policy which sets its goal as literacy and numeracy is not really a goal that children can pick up, that these are foundational, these are basic abilities that any child should be able to pick up within 3 4 months of going to school. That really can't be a goal, and that's how the policy reduces the discourse of education and even the idea of aims of education in primary school. uh, it is in that sense doesn't really envisages or doesn't have a goal of what the life of an educated child or a person should be. It doesn't really envisage what happens to people who go to school or college, and then how do they together become pillars of a society which is a secular society, which is a democratic space. So it takes education as a means, as a very limited means of achieving basic not, I don't want to use the word goal, of something like get a job and start earning livelihood and start paying taxes. That kind of limited understanding of human life is where this policy seems to be taking us. And it actually changes the discourse in a very, very strategic manner. How does it do that? If you read the document, you find a repeated mention of the word seva, ahimsa, swachhata, sacrifice, courtesy, empathy, sound ethical moorings, respect for others, cleanliness, and then suddenly respect for public property. So on the one hand is ahimsa, and on the other hand is respect for public property and cleanliness. A kind of, they don't make really a continuum with using which you can understand human life. So it looks like a very, very clear behavior modification agenda. It has the support of neuroscience lobby, it has the support of corporates, and plus there is this element of, a very populist understanding of the goals of education. So it is not an enabling document. It doesn't envisage schools and colleges as places where people become capable of contributing to society. They become secular, they become equal, they become fraternous. No, it seems to be deriving from the limited idea of education as a behavior modification agenda. And if you read 2 3 times, then you realize it seems, they're inspired by the models of 17th century or 16th century European labs, treating children almost like rats and pigeons. One big point, a major point that I must remind you or bring to your attention is that how it twists the whole issue of scientific temper. It was a core agenda of educational curriculum over the last several decades. But NEP 2020 presents scientific temper as a skill. Now, what happens to a skill? When you call something a skill, some may develop, some may not develop it. It makes scientific temper as an optional consequence of education. In a society which has such deep rooted caste, religious, gender uh, stereotypes based in very conservative interpretations of religion, in a society where life is led for millions of people by giving in to very, unscientific indigenous concepts, in that it reduces scientific temper to a skill. And there you again see that there is this kind of dilution of the idea of school or a learning institution, because first and foremost a learning institution is where you learn to be with others, you learn to be social, you learn to be fraternous, you learn to treat, accept everybody as equal in terms of their mental, intellectual and physical abilities. And on the one hand, it reduces scientific temper to skill. On the other hand, it wants to bring all kinds of education to 40% online, which means that children or young people in colleges won't be required to go to the educational institution on a regular basis. So neither you come out of your homes, which are culturally shaped. You don't step out of that culture and get into the ethos of an educational institution, nor do you really necessarily develop a scientific orientation, a scientific perspective. And therefore, the constitutional goals of equality, justice, I would say even tolerance, compassion, they take a back seat. And so it is definitely a very deep design. It is not a simple design, and it is a blowback to education by developing a fantasy for nostalgia for the past, which is presented as a narrative of nationalism. And just too many things. So there is this kind of impatience and rejection of what all has been done in the field of education till now. So they propose a new structure, that 5 plus 4 plus 4 plus 3, but it interestingly also presents it only as a curricular structure. So how can you have one curricular structure and one formal structure? Because the structure of the school is also related to teacher appointments, infrastructural provisions, curricular provisions, organizational resources, etc. So it is a time to be anxious. It is a time to be worried for all the young people who are thinking of joining school education as their career, or becoming school teacher or university teachers, that where will these programs take us to? What will be the connection between teacher education institutions and school education? So it's not just ambiguity. Actually, it's a scene of a complete disassociation and a de-link between structures that have been created. Now, it's very important to point this out because it will have implications for states. States have recruitment rules, their departments of Directorate of Education hire teachers. So this policy makes it very, very binding, necessary for all institutions to offer uniform teacher education programs, only one teacher education program for this new structure. So they say integrated teacher education program for foundational stage, for preparatory stage. But then in the policy, it says that these are not structural, these are only for curricular reforms. So how can they have a teacher education program related to that? This should help us to identify one demand or one point to be voiced, that probably the policy requires some kind of cleaning out, some streamlining, just almost like a program of action. And while we demand for a program of action, we also insist that it is a guiding document. It is a document which should inspire us rather than force us to implement it like a office rule, or some kind of uh, um, a document, like a Indian Penal Code. While it emphasizes the need for equitable and inclusive education, but it has absolutely no articulation of any mechanisms for gender equity or equality, for caste-based discrimination, for religious equality, and for the issues of Adivasi people. Now we are in 2020. I mean, we are in 24. This was articulated in 2020, so many years after our independence. There should have been some systemic maturity to articulate mechanisms and not just resort to these kind of lofty phrase works. The policy has to have some direction plus some mechanisms. I also very quickly want to bring in the issue of three language formula. And we must remember that first time when it was proposed by the Great Kothari Commission, our country was facing, I mean, the context was different. We were just out of our freedom battle. We had just become independent, and India had to feel like India. Even then, the commission didn't really make it a necessary kind of a law to be implemented. But therefore we must also recognize that this time it is being emphasized as a law, and it is being essentialized for its goal of enabling people to communicate across the country. The moment anything gets essentialized, it loses its function, it loses its appeal. As an idea, I would really want that, no, North Indian children should take interest in learning South Indian languages, should take interest in learning Northeastern languages, should take interest in learning tribal languages too. And in that sense, it's a very good idea. But uh, so far, we have seen that it has given the liberty to North Indians to not learn any other language. And it has been pushed on parts of India where Hindi is not a lingua franca. Uh, Children growing up in those parts have faced this kind of challenge, or it has been pushed on them. And in the current round, that is where the policy seems to be going in that direction. I think what we need to resist is not the idea that Indian children learn multiple languages, but we need to resist that this becoming a necessary rule, or this becoming the central aspect of school education. That is where I again come back to where I had started, that it is very reductionist in its approach, and what it calls as reform is basically defeating the whole idea of education as something which makes you relate to other, think of what is beyond you, and think of a very secular society. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Latika. I think it was a very presented views on a lot of very nuanced dimensions of educational policy. I also think that there are certain issues which need a lot of attention. The over centralization, as you mentioned. Creation of a framework which focuses largely on regulatory bodies without creating localized structures for implementation at the level of school, at the level of colleges. Higher education has actually been kind of looked at from the lens of only multidisciplinarity. So that's why it becomes too reductionist, as if our colleges are not doing a lot of disciplines right now. And what we have achieved in 70 years or 74 years, we have been made to feel guilty about it, as if something largely, it was not in the right direction. Rather, we wouldn't have achieved this success. But this, policy, as you said, fails to envisage the future, based on the shoulders of what we have achieved so far. And presently it doesn't even take stock of where we are in terms of our capabilities, our economic capabilities, the resources. So quickly we will move to Dr. Richa Sharma. We might come back to you, Latika ma'am. Dr. Richa Sharma, I think I want your specific inputs about something which we all are hearing everywhere. These workshops, seminars which are being organized about NEP are all about Indianization. They're all about Indian knowledge systems. They're all about some nationalistic fervor which must be kind of injected into us, which was not which was not flowing in our social and cultural fabric so far, as if it is a reinvention of a new nationalism. So because you are an expert on this subject, your own work has been, largely about understanding this Indian knowledge system philosophically. So I want your comments on what is this Indianness and what is this knowledge in IKS. We really need your, expert opinion on this. I also want you to shed light on the related dimensions of it. Dr. Richa Sharma, please.
Thank you, Dr. Kanchan, and thank you, All India Professional Congress, for having me on this platform. It is the term Indian knowledge system itself is it's a logical fallacy, because we will see in terms of, as I enumerate, what is Indian in Indian knowledge system and what is knowledge in this Indian knowledge system. As if we believe in a particular kind of knowledge, then there's nothing Indian about it. So that's where I'm saying that there's a logical fallacy in this. Interestingly, the policy document is just 66 pages. And within that 66 pages, it is only in 2 paragraphs, there's something related to the phrase Indian knowledge system appears. I'm saying the phrase because, interestingly, if you look at the events and seminars and webinars which have been following and their number, you will see that the policy representation of it is actually not that much in one sense. So there's a disproportion in what policy envisages and how it has been propagated in actuality. So see, the 0.4, 0.27 and 29 have specific terms, and which are knowledge of India, not Indian knowledge system. And then it goes on to saying that it includes modern Indian knowledge, it includes India's future aspirations also, and then it is about tribal knowledge, indigenous and traditional ways of learning. So first of all, policy makers in some way are highly, probably they were not cognizant of the intricate distinctions between indigenous, traditional and Indian and modern knowledge, which to my mind, greatest service to this definition of this, clarity has come from the Indian philosophers like Sudipto Kaviraj, Ramchandra Guha, Ramu Gandhi, Gopal Guru, and others who have intricately in their decolonial discourse have always propelled us and asked us to distinguish between these terms. So therefore, I say that there is a fallacy in the term itself, Indian knowledge system. Then, if we look at how policy in other sense is mentioning this, so with it's at the starting in page number probably 3 or 2, it says that the policy's principle is the rich heritage of the ancient and eternal Indian knowledge and thought has been guiding light for this policy. Now, this eternal Indian knowledge again is fallacious because the term Indian itself has a particular origin. It is not eternal in itself. The term, of course, we all know, comes in a very, very specific historical context. The term did not exist before that historical point of time. So there is nothing eternal about it in some sense. It also says that the major principle through which it guides are rooted in the rootedness and pride in India. It's rich, diverse, ancient, modern culture. So this modern word is again, like Latika is saying, it's just sprinkled because it also has to speak to something which is also seemingly progressive, whereas it immediately follows by the systems and traditions. So there's a contradiction in each sentence wherever anything which relates to Indian knowledge system appears in the policy document. Then there's something more interesting with respect to another allied term, which is Sanskrit knowledge systems, and that appears in 4.17. Which then immediately, without saying anything as to what does it even mean, the policy goes on to talk about languages, where they say that we had classical languages and Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, Malayalam, Odia, and all of, in fact, and that it goes on to extend itself and brings in Pali, Persian, and Prakrit to its cohort, without saying that how are considered classical, what is classical about them, and what is then, had they done that kind of research, they would have realized that their classicalness in itself is an indicator of their non-Indianness in some sense, that they go beyond being the geographical limitations of the world India in some sense. So that's where I, in some sense, I just wanted to bring the meaning where the problem is. Now, I would like to come to some of the other issues which I find inconsistent with respect to Indian knowledge system. And one is that what kind of knowledge? So, now moving on to the term knowledge within the Indian knowledge system. And one hand it says incorporating knowledge in an accurate and scientific manner. Then emphasizing developing scientific temper and rational thought. And then at the same time, there is a reverence for the traditions and customs and rituals. Now, if we go by how knowledge is created rigorously, academically, with rigor, then we realize that this scientific manner doesn't come out of the blue. There has to be an engagement there, and countries who have been able to in some sense learn and preserve their knowledge has invested heavily in translations of highest kind, in libraries, in donations. And on the other hand, if we see that our budget for universities have been cut, and particularly of the departments where such kind of knowledge generation and creation takes place. So there are a lot of contradiction in the implementation of the same thing that policy is talking about. So there is an inconsistency in terms of what it wants to achieve and what it is doing on ground. Kanchan, will I have a permission to share my screen?
Yes, our technical team can help you. Mohit sir, can we help Richa ma'am to share her screen?
Kanchan, she can share.
Yeah.
Okay.
Please. Thank you.
Okay, so here what basically I'm talking about that, let's look at how despite just dedicated 2 paragraphs, not even complete 2 paragraphs, how we are seeing it being implemented.
Your screen is not there.
Yeah, I'll just
Okay.
let me know if it's visible. Is it visible?
Yeah, it is now.
So now this is to just to bring to audience attention that what is being perpetuated and popularized in the name of Indian knowledge system. This is one of the universities poster, lot of seminars. They're innumerable. If I'll just Google it, they have gone more than 10,000. So I couldn't give you exact data, but look at the picture on the side. Now here from the Indian knowledge system, what I may also call the non-Vedic traditions like Charvakas, Buddhist, Jains, and then later on the Ajivikas, the Lingayats, all of those traditions are missing from these posters. And this is not one. I will take you to a lot of other posters quickly just to give you an idea that what is being perpetuated in the name of Indian knowledge system. So see, Sanskrit system is also finding some space on the poster in some ways, but it is largely a piecemeal representation of the tribal culture. Then let's see who are the people who are presented as an expert on these panels. So there are Dr. Pandey, Dr. Pandit, Dr. Das, Dr. Dubey, Dr. Thakur, and let's go again. You will see if you just one person sits and carefully just note down the name of the speakers from all these posters and seminar brochures, you will realize that the speakers are dominated by the one class, caste, and gender categories, that to one geographical region, which means the word Indian in itself is highly exclusionary when it comes to implementation of how it has been, going around and in what way people are talking about it. So these are just some example that I wanted to bring to your attention, and you just read the names: Shastri, Sharma, Tripathi, Ravi Shankar, Chakrabarti. This, you will be surprised. I could not, I did not have enough time to give you a complete data on it, but I think with some help here, I will wish to do it, that how it is highly tilted towards the Gangetic Bell's class, caste, gender category, which is being dominated in the sphere of how we have been talking about Indian knowledge system. So there are few more. There is again Sanskrit knowledge systems. Then it kind of it comes as a placeholder for the Indian knowledge system here and there. So there are some examples of that too, where you will see that on one hand the policy talks about scientific temper, but on the other hand there are people represented by spiritual mathas and segments who are not involved into a systematic, rigorous knowledge creation, which comes from liberal academic spaces, which comes from trained people, and here we are to kind of bear them and be pay about it. So these are more like you be surprised by just looking their surnames and some, and then because the policy has just very ambiguous articulation of what Indian knowledge system is or knowledge of India is, you will find several such NEP experts, academic evangelists, and mentors appearing on YouTube and giving you complete gyan of all those years of the ages where you would require to spend almost half of your life with your guru. So traditionally, if you understand the knowledge, what they are packaging and moduling would have come in a vanprastha, where the limited period you would have been spending would have been around 25 to 30 years in the ashram of your guru. So this is very interesting, the way it is being spanning out. I'll stop here, but I'll come to one more important point, and which has to do with who will suffer from this kind of implementing, this kind of propagation of Indian knowledge system. And that is a question of social justice to my mind, that, with its very with its very conception of Indian knowledge in this way, there is an unjust conceptualization of it, because these are government institutions and universities which are mandated to implement this curricula. Now, who goes to these institutions now? These are meritorious students from marginalized communities and geographies who have their sole access is to these institutions, right? Now, the current implementation privileges this kind of knowledge system, and then is again controlled by the same dominant caste and class communities which have kept this marginalized section at the margins, like we have seen in the posters. So students from the marginalized background will all the more be placed at a structural disadvantage in this system of this Indian knowledge you know framework. Their own knowledge traditions are excluded. The posters and the way things are happening across universities and institutions will tell you. Um, Dominant traditions are finding not just a sort of, earlier some trends were very hidden. We studied that, all the dominant cultures comes in a hidden form. Here, there's nothing hidden about it. That's the most interesting thing. So, this marginalization is on your face. And then education advancement becomes contingent on observing knowledge of tradition, which has historically been keeping this community out of the privileged position, and it will continue to do so, because that's the kind of knowledge that they would be receiving. So, those are some of my submission to the platform today. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Richa. I think it was exemplar, and few of our participants are also raising certain concerns. One of them says that it is not about Indian knowledge system; it is about Brahminical knowledge system, which dispossesses all other castes, minorities, marginal group of people. I mean, interestingly, our own policy, the policy which we are debating right now, has nowhere used, caste as a category of, people or students to be addressed. It talks about socio-economically disadvantaged groups. So, it is a very generic category. It takes away the focus from the caste. And I think you have very brilliantly put ahead that how there is a politicization, there is a hijacking, there is a systemic way or a systemic attempt being made by one particular ideology and cultural hegemony to be imposed in the name of this Indianization. I think very rightly said. We now move towards I'm taking ahead from this. I invite Mr. Devasahayam, who is with us representing Tamil Nadu. Recently, we have seen a huge controversy, happening because the central government, our Minister of Education, Union Minister of Education, has stopped funding, for Tamil Nadu Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan. It is more than around 2,000 crores. The number of children and students and teachers are being impacted due to this. The larger, contention here being that they have to implement three-language formula, which the state government has vociferously, resisted. We would like to go to Devasahayam sir now, who would explain to us, more objectively how we should look at it. We are one of our panelists, Dr. Latika Gupta, has already, raised it that how three-language formula shouldn't be a rule. But at the same time, while I invite Devasahayam sir, I want to, raise two important points. Number one is this, that we have to understand, policy is not a legal document. Policy is an advisory guiding framework. So we also have to understand that this particular policy was not even, brought into Parliament for discussion. It all those spaces, all those stakeholders, which were supposed to debate it and discuss it before implementation, those processes were not done. At the same time, I also want to say that, Constitution of India mandates, certain provisions for states to, legislate on topics of concurrent list as well as state list. So I'm sure Mr. Devasahayam would shed more light on this. Devasahayam, sir, we want your comments about two important things. Number one, what is this contestation in Tamil Nadu which is happening? And number two, how do you think that three language formula must not be taken as a rule? Rather, I mean, we should be free to, or states should be free to understand and implement, according to their own cultural, linguistic, and economic context. So, Devasahayam, sir, I pass it on to you now, please.
Yeah, thank you, madam. First of all, my sincere apologies for the procrastination. Sorry. And I think that I should not waste a single second of the time provided to me in this online discussion. I must first convey all the necessary information without any unnecessary words. So, dear friends, that's why I have prepared my speech and present it here in a very structured manner. Already I have prepared it. So, I want to present that same speech here. Dear friends, greetings. Today is one of the most significant days among the online discussions conducted under this room. I extend my heartfelt Women's Day wishes to all the incredible women who make this day even more special. My warm wishes are not only for the women participating in this discussion, but also for every woman flourishing in every corner of the world. It is remarkable that the three speakers who have already presented strong perspectives on the National Education Policy 2020 are women. I extend my special Women's Day wishes to them. Additionally, in fact, that this discussion is being coordinated by a woman adds to the significance, admiration, and inspiration of this occasion. I also express my sincere respects and Women's Day greetings to Mrs. Kanchan, the National Head of the Education Vertical of the All India Professional Congress, for giving me, a man, the opportunity to be a part of this discussion alongside four distinguished women. This online discussion has been organized to deliberate on various dimensions of the National Education Policy 2020. Before presenting my views on this subject, I would like to first explain the background of my perspective. Education is one of humanity's most extraordinary phenomena. No other living species in the world has an institutionalized system of education or the structured concept of schools. Education serves as the incredible medium through which all marvels of human evolution, cultural and civilizational values, scientific advancements, literature, spirituality, rationalism, and social thought are transmitted to future generations. Education is not just about shaping individuals. It is a philosophy that constructs and transforms entire societies. Every human being is born with a physical age that begins at birth. Please kindly note, every human being is born with a physical age that begins at birth. But the age of knowledge for each individual starts from the moment human civilization emerged. In fact, it dates back to whatever point in time humanity believes the universe began. Education has been the catalyst for monumental changes. It gave birth to airplanes, ships, and automobiles. It replaced monarchy with democracy. It fostered socialism in various countries. It awakened communism. It inspired literature that touches the depths of the heart, and it gave rise to poetry that expresses love. Education is what distinguishes and elevates humans from other living beings. India is a democratic republic. It is not a kingdom. I repeated this word because already Rahul Gandhi himself has pronounced this same version. India is a democratic republic, not a kingdom. Democracy embraces dialectics. Dialectics is science. Nothing is permanent except change. If there is time later, we can discuss anything in this discussion. The RSS group is thinking about their singular goal on all platforms. The result is the National Education Policy 2020. So this is the result. The National Education Policy they have got here only on that their personal goal. It is not merely a union of states. India is not merely a union of states. It is a union of ethnicities, languages, religions, and cultures. The number of speakers should never determine the necessity of preserving your language. It should not. That is the constitutional India. Do you think you can come to Tamilnadu and propagate Hindi? Are you setting up Hindi propaganda boards? Are you talking about the greatness of the Hindi language? Feel free to do so. Tamils have not imposed any restrictions on that. But you cannot use the government machinery to do so. This is the very important. You cannot use the government machinery to do so. You cannot force it to be taught in government schools. You can do whatever you want as a volunteer, as a private organization, or as a non-governmental organization. Propagate it, and if people accept it and make it their spoken language, we have no objection. Feel free to do so. Similarly, we have no objection to you propagating any religion. Keep talking about whatever religion it is. If people convert to that particular religion, let them convert. That is not a problem. But you cannot do it officially. You must not. The Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister declared that Sanatana Dharma is India's national religion. Didn't he? That is what we condemn. Neither the union government, nor the state government, nor the district administration can align itself with any particular religion. The Constitution does not permit it. Those who do so are acting against the Constitution. This is called secularism. The foundation of the Indian Union is secularism. If a union loses secularism, there is a risk that its unique states will scatter into separate nations. It could be linguistic secularism, religious secularism, or ethnic secularism. That's why in a recent Supreme Court ruling, the judges said that while the word secularism may not have been present when the Constitution was drafted, the essence of the entire Constitution is secularism. Therefore, the word secularism cannot be removed. Remember, anyone who speaks against India's secularism is an enemy of India. Remember, anyone who speaks against India's secularism is an enemy of India.
Devasahayam sir, can I request you to summarize your talk?
Yeah,
because we have a time limit and we also want to take some questions. But quickly, if you can just make a comment on 3-language formula for Tamil Nadu quickly. And please summarize it. I'm sorry, I'm stopping you, but we have time limit. We have time constraint. That's fine.
Sorry. Actually, there is only one point that I want to insist in this meeting. That is, see, please, some say that learning a third language enhances the cognitive development. Okay, right? What scientific evidence is there for this claim? If there were any scientific basis for this, countries worldwide would have implemented it. Has any developed country, any nation we consider advanced in science, issued a report stating that learning 3 languages enhances a child's cognitive development? Has any country with a high standard of education implemented this policy? If learning 3 languages enhances cognitive development, then learning 4 languages would enhance it even more. Learning 5 languages would enhance it further, and so on. Would it keep increasing the number indefinitely? Where is the limit? They say that learning 3 languages enhances cognitive development, and then they throw the next joke at us. They insist that 2 of 3 languages must be Indian languages. Does cognitive development only increase if 2 of the 3 languages are Indian? What is the scientific basis for this? They are twisting and turning to ultimately impose Hindi on Tamils. We are not saying Hindi. We are saying 3 languages. You can learn any Indian languages, but remember, Hindi is India's official language. This is what they are telling. What kind of game is this? By declaring Hindi as the sole official language of India, and then enforcing the 3 language policy in the national education policy, saying you can learn any Indian language as the 3rd language. What does that mean? It is an indirect imposition of Hindi. Are Tamil Nadu's intellectuals incapable of understanding this? If the RSS and BJP government had even a minimal sense of integrity, they would first make all 22 scheduled languages the official languages of India, and then in the 3 language policy, allow states to choose any language. They will never do this. So this is
Okay. I would stop you here, and I would just summarize that, I think we all understand, I think this is an assertion which we want to make, that 3 language formula can be a guiding principle, but still, there should be flexibility, and central government should, create a framework where states feel flexible to adopt this formula as per their necessity, as per the funding, because it also, kind of demands that there would be a significant economic burden on the states to create textbooks, to appoint teachers. So I think depending on the state's linguistic and cultural, context, states should be free to, adopt this. And also, I think Tamil Nadu state has very vehemently said that government schools only, which are run by Tamil Nadu state, we would not be able to implement it. But the central schools and private schools are free to adopt 3 language formula. The state is showing a lot of, kind of correspondence with the policy. Yeah, but it is only resisting that, this kind of imposition and also coercion is wrong. So I think what Dr. Latika was saying, that, to make it a rule is going to be detrimental to the spirit and ethos of, multilingualism of the country. So I think, we have had a very good presentation by our panelists. And I think this has been wonderful, because we have touched upon a lot of aspects. Maybe it was higher education or primary education or secondary education. So there's a lot of focus which we needed, and I think our panelists have done a very, very wonderful job in doing so. Pallavi, I think we can invite 1 or 2 questions. I mean, if there is some time left, or do you think we should just quickly wind up?
Yes, no, I have no decision. If the panelists are okay to take just a couple of questions.
Yeah, we can take 1 or 2 questions, I mean.
That'd be wonderful. Because this has been an extremely very, very good talk. Already
Yes.
some of the groups are buzzing with compliments, and genuinely so much of valuable learning has happened.
Yes.
So it will be nice if you can take a couple of questions, please.
Yeah, we can take a couple of questions. Maybe from the chat, we can take 1 or 2 questions.
Yes, and also Mr. Raghunath here has already raised his hand, so maybe we can unmute him and ask.
Okay, right. Yeah, we can ask Raghunath sir to ask his question. Please keep the question precise, sir.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, earlier it is assumed that the Brahminical system or Sanatan system earlier did not allow the lower caste to study Sanskrit or knowledge. They have deprived them. And now it is seen that they are propagating their knowledge through academic way to study the Indian knowledge system or old system, whatever they used to teach in their Brahminical setup. So earlier it was not allowed to teach, and now it is allowed to study for all as a choice. So is it as a modern progression in their Brahminical system, or is it as a force? So to Richa ma'am, am I clear in the question?
Dr. Richa, you may please take this up. Thank you.
We go one by one. Yeah.
Yes.
So, nothing is, of course, you're right about the history in some sense, and the great historian K.N. Panikkar writes that how English education democratized Indian education system in some sense, despite Gandhi opposing it for several other valid reasons. But there was no doubt, both Ambedkar, Panikkar, and others says that English brought the people who were so far out of the schooling with their system. And what the policy is trying to do is basically, policy has nothing which can be logically be put into articulation. It is absolutely, my training is in philosophy, and by practice, I'm trained to see those logical lexicon and things, and you would find that neither there is a force, neither there is a research, neither there is any coherence, there's any attempt to coherence articulation of what they really want to do. To my mind, then strategy could be this, that there is an apparent coherence to keep the general audience in kind of a ambiguity. And then that's where I brought you those posters to tell you that in terms of implementation, there's a greater clarity as to what they want to propagate, and not in terms of the, so I would probably see it in that sense, that there is no force, but there's this one singular force of keeping a certain masses at the level of low incompetences, so that there is a there is only a certain people who continue to enjoy the power by having the powerful knowledge with them.
I want to add to it, Raghunath Mishra ji. It's
Yes,
not
yes,
so
ma'am.
straight. There is a problem in your formulation itself that, earlier Brahminical system did not allow, now it's allowing. So who are they to allow? What is your perspective? Do not, if you see it as a modern progression, then there is a serious problem to it, because then the epistemological privilege and the responsibility in your construction rests with the Brahminical masculine framework. That's not true. India has come forward. The National Curriculum Framework 2005's assertion was that we should feel confident that all Indians' life experiences must constitute knowledge, right? So one party didn't give, even though that's also a fantasy, that knowledge in itself was at different scale. It had a different function in that society. And now knowledge has a very different function. And it's not just a function, it's a right, right? It's a fundamental right. And so presenting it in such kind of neat binary that earlier it didn't allow, now it's allowing, limits the scope of this idea and limits the scope of knowledge in a modern society. We have to go beyond this. Nobody can have, should have the ownership of knowledge. It's a collective enterprise. It has to grow.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you, Richa ji and Latika ji. We would have another question now. I think Mr. Ayan Banerjee has raised his hand. You can quickly ask your question, sir.
Hello. Yeah, thank you so much to the entire panel for a wonderful discussion. My question is, any document, policy document of this magnitude and complexity needs a proper assessment of similar documents followed in other countries. Let's say Japan, USA, Europe, China, etc. So does this 66-page NEP document have a reference to similar policy documents elsewhere?
Mr. Banerjee, it's a very appealing idea. It always looks very lucrative to look around. And that's also a fashion. Like Delhi government always said, that this is what is done in Finland. So they were creating Finland in Indian schools. But we really want to be inspired by Chinese policy document, which a country which really has no space for democracy? And so we have to be very selective, very critical, and very informed when when we stretch out our wings to draw inspiration. Actually, yes, Japan is a very good idea, very good structure, because they have modernized their system while they have retained some of Japan's social values. But Japan doesn't have caste. It doesn't have a caste and gender united as exploitative forces. And so this kind of comparison may not really take us forward, because in educational theory, we say that things should not be replicated, things should not be borrowed and institutionalized out of their context. So I would be very cautious on that front.
Yes, but at the
Thank you
same
for
time,
your.
I think I would also like to add to what Dr. Latika is saying, that, when comparisons of policies or, policy documents, may guide us in certain directions. But, eventually when you draft your own policy, it has to be guided, by your history. It has to be guided by your own cultural and your own indigenous, necessities. It also must, incorporate our challenges, contextual to our political, social systems. So we may draw, some kind of parallel, with the existing systems across the world, because that is how the exchange of ideas, and a lot of other things takes place. We would have our students going abroad, for employment purposes, for other, higher educational purposes. But and also, India interacts, on a global geopolitical framework. So suppose, as today we are seeing a lot of war, a trade war being, kind of. Taking place because of one superpower, trying to manipulate and trying to structuralize certain things. At the same time, we have to understand how our education system will then be equipped, to produce in our country, how our industries would be supported, what kind of knowledge we need, for our self-reliance. So these kind of models are also supposed to be integrated, but they cannot be just brought in, mindlessly from outside. They have to be, created by our own wisdom and our own need systems. So this is very important what Dr. Latika is saying, that, we have to kind of measure and understand what is there, which is not similar to us, and what is there which can help us. So we can take certain things, we can adopt, but we need to very critically understand and analyze what lies ahead for us as a nation, as a country, and the direction in which we want to go. So there used to be, like in Nehruvian model, like if you would understand educational planning and a lot of other things, there was a need to kind of strengthen our country in terms of manpower needs. There was also a need, what we demand, as a social system. But recently, what is happening? It is only an imposition of one kind of structure. So this Brahminical knowledge, or the Hindutva ideology, or cultural hegemony of North over other regions. This is problematic, but our policy have to be our own contemplation and deliberations over our issues and concerns. At the same time, I think what Dr. Richa was saying, that we must also try to understand, that what is being imposed, and what is the essence of this imposition. It cannot be, just imposition of one particular kind of type. One particular kind or type of, knowledge systems. We have multiple other things to guide our way for policy. So policy should also give direction for resource structures, for, envisage some future. I think we would take one last question from Mr. Natarajan. He has raised his hand. This would be our last question. After this, we will wind up.
Excellent and incisive discussion by the panelists. It was very informative. So one of the questions that I want to pose to them is this: should education be still in the concurrent list, or should it be moved to the state list again?
Dr. Latika, would you like to answer this?
I think sharing is caring. So that's, these days young people's formula. We should not really see this kind of going back or falling back upon what was there as a solution of this problem, because the state and the central government, they must collaborate, they must cooperate, they must bring in their resources and energies, they must bring in their intellectual resources together. So we, rather than withdrawing from it and leaving several states to struggle to fend for themselves, is not a really good idea. There are states that are not as resourceful as some of other larger states, maybe. I think of several northeastern states. I even think of Odisha, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh. The entire India, the entire country, all Indians have to feel responsible in that sense. And for that, I think concurrent list is a good thing for us in education sector. It pushes the federal structure to overcome the political affiliations or commitments, and yet worry about all children, all Indian children, or all Indian young people. So I won't see it as a solution. I would see it as a much bigger problem.
Yeah, and I think, I would like to add to this that constitutionally, if you go to Article 254, Article 257, Article 73 of the Constitution, it gives a lot of space, for union government to legislate on concurrent list subjects. But at the same time, state governments, also can legislate. But, there is some sound coming maybe from... Yeah, so we have to understand that these provisions, including Article 355 of the Constitution, we have to understand that in concurrent list, when both of these state and union government legislate, the subject of legislature or the legislation becomes contestable only when there is a conflict. So most of the time, as Dr. Latika was saying, there is an expectation of collaborative, teamwork on these subjects, and it also needs a kind of consensus on certain things between union government and state governments. Only on the cases where there is a conflict, then the union government, the laws prescribed by the union government prevails. But that also is contestable in court of law. That is the space given by the Constitution of India. So the constitutional basic structure is most important, when we talk about concurrent list. Bringing it back to state list is not going to, solve this problem, because even then, if we read these Article 254 and 257 and 256, we have to understand that despite certain subjects being in state list, union government would have its own way to legislate on those subjects. So I think what we need in education is not this legal confrontation over the issues and subjects. What we need is a good philosophy, good approach, and a more educationally relevant and viable approach to lead the country in a direction, where we need a more comprehensive policy which takes into account the contextual realities of caste, of diversity, of pluralism, of linguistic, challenges of resources, the disparity of the state, abilities, economic abilities to implement these. So I think what we need is an effort to understand how we different states kind of appear to do on these fronts, and whether they have this flexibility, this autonomy to devise their own policies, their own structural programs, their own understanding of school and higher education. So I think this has been a very good discussion. It raised, yes, I think Dr. Latika wants to add to this.
I'll just take 1 minute, because I am tempted to address this question, which has been posted on chat. Can we reject all older Indian knowledge of yoga, music, Ayurveda, liberation as useless or backward? I really want to I want the person who has asked this question to think more deeply about this, that the Indian music system, for all its beauty, for all its richness, if you call it a system, all the music traditions, classical music systems, etc., for all of them, why did they really not survive in our school system? Why are schools not a source of teaching classical music? Does anybody go to school to learn classical music? Is there any music teacher who says, my goal is to teach all the children at least one form of classical music? No. Rather than, getting lost in their glory, think about them. Why have they struggled to remain a common experience? They were never a common experience. All classical music traditions are very caste oriented. People were prohibited in large numbers. And therefore, if they have to be brought back, they can't be brought back, they can't be revived, they can't be taught with this just idea of Indian knowledge systems. They're not part of India, they were not part of Indian society. Liberation in the time when the society has been made hyper capitalist, liberation in terms of those philosophical ideas, you really need to think deeply. What do you want to achieve out of life? And do they really offer an understanding of life, what human life should be? Yoga, music, Ayurveda, liberation put together. Why doesn't this list go beyond these 4, 5 entries? They don't offer a complete understanding, a goal, of a human life, a productive, happy human life which is concerned about all. So we really need to overcome these narrow confines of what is knowledge, and nobody is declaring them backward or useless. People are pointing out that they were very casteist, they have their own gender related problems, and they exclude many other traditions from becoming a part of knowledge. That is our problem with that.
Well, I think that has been well summarized, Dr. Latika. Nothing more needs to be said about it. Yes. So we would now, we are now reaching the end of this marvelous and very, precise, very kind of energetic session, I would say. Our panelists, Dr. Professor Shanta ma'am, Dr. Latika Gupta, Dr. Richa Sharma and Mr. Devasahayam have really kind of addressed all the dimensions, all the aspects of national education policy. At the same time, they have raised important issues and concerns related to the dynamics with which this policy struggles, to amalgamate caste, to amalgamate linguistic pluralism, to amalgamate economic substructures. Also, we talked about how exclusionary certain systems such as Brahminical knowledge system can be in the name of Indian knowledge system, and it doesn't generically involve every other tradition and indigenous knowledge in which we have had for so many years in the country. And this imposition, this cultural hegemony is something which we must resist in the name of policy. We need more, state policies in that particular, in that particular light, which can be more inclusive, which can be more concerned about the realities and contexts of each and every state. I hand it over to Pallavi ji now. I think we have reached the end